Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into some fascinating source material you brought to the table. We're looking closely at something most of us know, maybe even take the everyday multivitamin.
That's right. Yeah, we're taking a close look at this source's perspective on whether these, everything in one pill supplements actually do what we hope they do.
Or maybe if we're kind of thinking about nutrient support the wrong way entirely.
Exactly. Our mission really is to unpack the source's, pretty critical take on multivitamins.
And the source material hints at some surprising stuff, doesn't it? Like nutrients canceling each other out or doses being so low they're basically, well, useless. Okay, let's get into it.
Well, it makes sense, that desire for a simple fix. You feel run down, maybe you haven't been eating great, sleep's off.
Right, you just want that one magic pill to cover everything.
It's a very natural impulse, and that's precisely where the source starts its main critique. It argues that trying to cram everything, all the vitamins, minerals, those trace elements they call oligoelementos, into a single pill. It's often just not effective.
They have that Argentinian saying, right? About grasping too much.
Yeah, qui mucho abarca poco aprieta. It translates roughly to he who grasps too much loses his grip.
Okay.
So the idea is you try to do too many things at once, you end up doing none of them particularly well, and the source basically says that's the multivitamin problem. Aiming for everything might mean you get, very little real benefit.
And a big reason why, according to them, is, well, it sounds weird, but the nutrients actually fighting each other.
Yes, that's a key issue they highlight. Putting certain things together in one pill doesn't mean they cooperate. Some combinations can actually interfere, cancel each other out, or lead to really poor, sometimes zero reaction in the body.
Wow. So what are some examples they found?
Well, in the typical formulas they looked at, they pointed out zinc and copper often clash. Vitamin D and calcium can be problematic together, and calcium and iron, too, they can compete.
So they actively work against each other in the pill.
Or at least during absorption and processing this. And what's really interesting, the source notes, is even when they're canceling out, your body still uses up energy trying to process them.
Huh. So you get no benefit and you waste energy.
That's the argument. You're not getting the nutrient and your body's working unnecessarily. Kind of a double whammy.
Okay, so conflicts are one problem. But building on that, the source also argues the amounts are often just off.
Yeah.
Like totally insufficient.
Exactly. Let's dive into some of the specifics from the multivitamin example they analyzed, because it reveals a definite pattern.
All right, where should we start? Calcium.
Yeah, calcium's a good example. It's often in there maybe as calcium phosphate or something similar. The source points out the amount has to be pretty small just to fit everything else in the pill.
Yeah.
But honestly, their bigger issue with calcium isn't just the dose in a multi, it's how our bodies manage calcium overall these days.
Okay, we should definitely circle back to that management point. But sticking with the dosage for now, what about magnesium?
Right, magnesium. In their example multi, the dose was something like 100 milligrams.
Which sounds like maybe not much.
While the source contrasts that with targeted magnesium supplementation, where you might be looking at, say, 300 milligrams, maybe 400 milligrams, depending on the goal.
And they also made a point about the type of magnesium, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. They really hammer this. Multivitamins usually just say magnesium, but is it magnesium threonate, which some research suggests is better for brain health? Is it deglycinate, often used for relaxation? Citrate for bowel regularity?
So different types do different things.
Potentially, yes. And the source argues that just listing magnesium at a low dose doesn't tell you anything useful and probably won't hit any specific target effectively.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then vitamin C. This comparison is pretty wild.
It really was striking. The multi-example had, 45 milligrams?
Tiny.
Right. Then they compare that to something like a targeted liposomal vitamin C, where a dose might be 1,600 milligrams or even higher.
1,600 versus 45. That's a massive difference.
It's huge. The source basically says at 45 milligram, your body might barely even notice it's there, compared to what's needed for some of vitamin C's key functions.
So you think you're getting your C, but it's negligible. What about vitamin E? Same story.
Pretty much the same pattern, yeah. The multi might have 15 milligram. The source suggests an optimal dose could be more like 250, 300 milligrams. They call that 15 milligram dose infima.
Minuscule.
Minuscule.
Yeah. And they argue it just won't work effectively as an antioxidant at that level, even paired with that tiny amount of vitamin C.
Okay. And zinc, people often take that for immunity, right?
Definitely. And again, low dose in the example, maybe 7 milligram. The source argues that's just not enough, especially if you're hoping to boost your immune defenses alongside vitamin C. Low doses won't cut it. Makes sense. What about iron? That's another common one, but also one you hear warnings about.
Yeah, the source is quite hesitant about iron in a general multi. They explain that your gut's absorption pathways for iron can get saturated really fast. Se saturan muy rápido, as they put it.
Saturated, meaning
Meaning they can only handle so much at once. Anything extra just doesn't get absorbed and gets, well, discarded. That's partly why high-dose iron can cause things like dark stools. So their point is, if you actually need iron, like for diagnosed iron deficiency anemia with low ferritin, you should probably use a more targeted absorbable form like liposomal iron, not the what they call miserable dose you find in a multi, which might not be absorbed well anyway.
miserable dose. Wow. Okay, so low doses, wrong types. What about vitamin D3 and K? They often come together.
They do, but again, the D3 dose in the example was tiny 5 micrograms. The source called it cortissimos, very short, compared to the 100, 125 micrograms, often targeted based on blood test.
5 versus over 100. Okay.
And for vitamin K, they point out the label often just says vitamin K. It doesn't specify if it's K1 or, more importantly, for their argument about calcium direction, K2, specifically the MK7 form.
So the form matters there too.
Absolutely, the
Yeah.
form and the dose. And just throwing low-dose D3 and unspecified K together in a multi-4, the source suggests it's unlikely to be very productive.
Right. So, okay, even if the doses were magically perfect, there's this whole other layer the source talks about, absorption. Like,
Yeah.
can your body even use this stuff?
This is such a crucial point, and maybe one people don't think about enough. The source explains that absorbing many vitamins and minerals isn't passive. You need specific helpers, cofactors, things like enzymes, stomach acid, other digestive juices.
Helpers.
Yeah, think of them like keys that unlock the door for the nutrient to get into your bloodstream, mostly in the small intestine. Without the right key, the door stays shut.
And they used vitamin B12 as a really clear example of this, didn't they? Something about nerve health.
Exactly. B12 is vital for nerves, for the myelin sheath. But to absorb B12, you absolutely need something called intrinsic factor.
Intrinsic factor. Okay.
It's a protein made by cells in your stomach lining. B12 has to bind to it, and then that complex can be absorbed further down in the intestine.
Ah, I see where this is going. What if your stomach isn't making enough intrinsic factor?
Precisely. And the source connects this directly to common modern issues. If you have things like chronic gastritis or reflux, or maybe you take antacids or those proton pump inhibitors regularly.
Which they weren't fans of, right? They called them poorly named gastric protectors.
Right, they argued these things reduce stomach acid and can make a disaster, potentially reducing intrinsic factor production. So you could be taking B12, eating B12, but without enough intrinsic factor, it just doesn't get absorbed.
So you just fizz.
Tirando por el inodoro, as the source graphically puts it, throwing it down the toilet, along with your money and your hopes for better B12 levels.
Wow. And they said other vitamins need this kind of help too, like D and C.
Yeah, they mentioned D and C also rely on various cofactors and good digestive function. It really hammers home that taking the pill is just step one. Your gut health is absolutely fundamental to actually benefiting from it, or from your food for that matter.
Okay, so we've got low doses, conflicts, absorption problems. But the source also raised concerns about actual risks, didn't they? Not just ineffectiveness.
They did. Beyond just not working well, they argued some ingredients bundled into a generic multi-Halay can be problematic.
Let's go back to calcium. You mentioned their concern about management. They sounded pretty strong on that.
You're very strong. Yeah, their stance against general calcium supplementation was clear. The concern is what they call maladigestion, poor management of calcium in the body, which they link to modern diets and lifestyles.
Poor management meaning.
Meaning the calcium you take might not go where you want it, your bones. Instead, it could potentially end up depositing in the walls of your arteries, the endothelium.
Calcium in artery walls.
Well, hey.
That sounds not good at all.
Definitely not. They suggest this could contribute to plaque and blockages. They kind of link it to the whole cholesterol debate, arguing cholesterol isn't the bad guy alone, but becomes an issue with chronic inflammation and poor metabolic health, which also messes with calcium management.
So the context matters hugely.
Hugely. Their bottom line was stark. They'd never recommend calcium supplements without first looking at how the individual's body actually handles calcium.
Never. That's a really strong word. Okay, what about B12 again? You said the multi-dose was higher than they liked.
Yeah, it's interesting. While B12 is generally seen as safe, they cautioned against just taking high doses without knowing if you need it. They use the phrase pasarnos de rosca, like overdoing it, stripping the threads.
So too much of a good thing.
Kind of. Creating an excess in the body no está bueno isn't good or desirable in their view. They pointed again to that multi-dose of maybe 2.4 milligram versus their preferred targeted max dose being closer to 1 milligram.
Got it. And vitamin A, there was a really serious warning there.
Oh, absolutely critical. The source stated vitamin A has contraindicaciones absolutas, absolute contraindications, meaning it's a strict no-go for women who are pregnant or might become pregnant because of the risk of birth defects.
And the problem was,
The problem, they found, is that this absolutely vital warning is often just missing or not clear at all on multivitamin labels that contain vitamin A, which is obviously a huge safety concern.
yeah, that's definitely a big red flag.
It really is. And just to circle back quickly to that zinc-copper conflict, they also reiterated that taking those together isn't just ineffective, it actually makes your body waste metabolic energy dealing with the conflict.
So low doses, conflicts, absorption issues, potential risks.
Yeah.
It really starts to sound like the source sees these multi as just a random jumble of ingredients.
That pretty much captures their perspective, yeah. They listed other things often found in them: manganese, lutein, various B vitamins like B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, folate, B12, iodine, selenium, chromium, molybdenum, biotin.
It's a long list.
It is. And the source's take is that it often seems thrown together randomly, hecho como de manera aleatoria. Like a salad, or using a Portuguese phrase they included, tu aposto aí, everything just put in there.
Without a clear goal.
Exactly. Without a specific therapeutic objective, without really considering all those interactions, the specific forms needed, the cofactors for absorption. Now, they did acknowledge B vitamins can work together synergistically, but the specific issues around B12 dose and absorption still stand.
So instead of a precise formula, it's more like a nutritional potluck and maybe not a very good one.
That's a good way to put it. That's the critique. They strongly favor intervenciones bien precisas, very precise, targeted interventions based on actual needs.
Okay, which leads perfectly into their proposed solution then. If generic multis are the problem, what's the answer according to this source?
Fundamentally, it boils down to personalization. Forget the generic pill, they argue. You need to understand your specific individual needs first. Because as they say, each one of us is an independent, particular being.
Makes sense. We're not all the same. So how do you figure out those individual needs?
Measurement. That's the cornerstone. They quote a principle. Lo que se mide tiende a mejorar. What gets measured tends to improve. You need data on your own body. Where are you deficient? Where might you have too much of something?
What kind of measurements are we talking about beyond a standard blood test?
Well, standard blood tests, Laboratorio Sanguíneo, are part of it for sure. But they also suggest potentially looking deeper with things like oligoscan.
Oligoscan, what's that?
They described it as using spectrophotometry, basically shining light on tissues to estimate mineral and heavy metal levels inside your cells, which can sometimes tell a different story than blood levels.
Interesting.
What else? They also mentioned stool analysis, coprocultivo, to understand gut health and absorption, hair analysis for certain minerals and toxins over time, and even genetic analysis to understand predispositions.
Wow, okay. That's a much more detailed picture than just grabbing a bottle off the shelf.
It's definitely a more involved approach, but the goal is to define precisely what you might need to supplement, and crucially, what you don't need, or what you might already have too much of. This avoids ineffective supplementing and potential harms from excess.
And tying back to absorption, they emphasize that even with targeted oral supplements, your gut health has to be working well, right?
Absolutely, they stress that point. Oral supplementation is common, but it requires good digestion to be effective, which they note can be a challenge for many people today.
Did they mention other ways to supplement if digestion is poor?
They touched on it briefly, mentioning that sometimes intravenous or intramuscular routes might be needed for severe absorption issues. But their main focus was really on optimizing oral supplementation by first getting that personalized picture through proper testing and, importantly, following up seguimiento to see if the interventions are actually working.
Okay, so this deep dive has really taken apart the idea that a standard multivitamin is the simple answer, hasn't it?
It certainly presents a strong counter-argument from this source's perspective. Their view is clear. These generic pills often fall short. The doses can be too low, nutrients conflict, absorption is a huge variable tied to gut health, the forms of nutrients matter, and there are real risks involved, sometimes without proper warnings.
And all these issues seem to trace back to that one core problem. The one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work for our individual biochemistries.
Precisely. The source's main takeaway is that effective, safe nutrient support really needs to start with understanding your unique nutritional status through testing. That allows for targeted, precise interventions based on actual need, not just guesswork with a generic pill that might be doing very little or even causing subtle issues.
It certainly gives you, the listener, a lot to chew on next time you look at that multivitamin bottle. And based on everything we've unpacked from the source material today, maybe here's a final thought to consider. If optimizing your digestion is so absolutely critical for getting nutrients, not just from supplements, but from your food too, where should your focus really begin if you're concerned about your nutritional status?